Hi, I'm Jeff Hartman from the Chelmsford Public Library. I'm here today to talk to you about Off the Shelf. Off the Shelf is the new collaboration between the library and Chelmsford Telemedia. And we know that you can't get into the physical library right now, so we were thinking, well, why don't we talk to you about a book that you maybe have had on your shelf. It's something that you've read a bunch of times and want to reread, or something that you bought a while ago and you just have never gotten around to. Now, as I said, we can't get into the library, but almost all these books that we're going to talk about today are available through our website. Just go to chelmsfordlibrary.org/econtent, and you should be able to download these from either Hoopla or Overdrive, one of the two digital platforms that we use. And then once you've gotten the book that we've read, pick a book up off your shelf and record a short little video like we're doing here, 2 to 3 minutes for each of you, and then just upload it to social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just tag Chelmsford Public Library and let us know what you're reading, and we'd love to share your content and let other people know. All right, so we've got a few here today from Chelmsford Library folks and people here at Chelmsford Telemedia. I want to tell you about what they're reading. First up is the Chelmsford Public Library Director, Becky Herman.
Hi there. I'm Becky Herman. I'm the library director in Chelmsford, talking to you from my home. In times of stress and anxiety, we often return to books that we feel are akin to comfort food, like macaroni and cheese or chicken pot pie. The books that we take off the shelf are things that stick to our ribs. They're familiar. They're old friends. They bring reassurance and familiarity, and each time we read them, they welcome us back and they welcome us home. Over the course of our lives, many of us reread favorite books because we identify with the different characters as we age. So I remember reading To Kill a Mockingbird again when we were doing it as part of our One Book Chelmsford program. And I'd originally read it as a teen, and I definitely identified with Scout. And then, of course, as I read it in the last couple of years, I found myself identifying with Atticus. So things change as our perspective changes with each reread. Different ideas resonate, and sometimes the books reveal, new secrets to us. And sometimes we find that as we've aged, that, we've outgrown some of our favorite reads. Our tastes change. I found that I couldn't revisit On the Road by Jack Kerouac as an adult because turns out I was just too pragmatic, and I'm just not as much of a dreamer as I was before. For many people, returning to a fantasy world that we enjoyed is a wonderful reread. So picking up, say, The Lord of the Rings, or what's now a childhood classic, the Harry Potter series. It returns us to an alternate reality that we find it's, supremely comforting, and it's predictable. In these times right now, it's, the reality that we're facing, it doesn't feel very appealing. So that alternate reality, it's our comfort food. But for me, it isn't world-building high fantasy that I like to return to. I prefer to go back in time and revisit old friends. Gus McCrae and Woodrow Call, they have comforted me in good times and bad. These two old codgers, they're the main characters in Larry McMurtry's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel Lonesome Dove. They have a deep and often hilarious friendship that addresses issues of both aging and regret, two things that many of us have dealt with as we grow older. This novel is set in the 1880s, and it centers on a cattle drive that goes from Texas to Montana. And Gus and Call have a bunch of crazy adventures. It really does captivate, even the less than enthusiastic Western reader. The sweep of the landscape and the adventures that unfold, they fill over 800 pages, but you can't put it down. Sense of place is important in this book, and the West actually feels like its own character. If you've read Angle of Repose by Wallace Stegner, or Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, or even True Grit by Charles Portis, then you know what I mean. You get how the West rises and unfolds, and it takes on a personality of its own. Think of the power of the West in the TV series Westworld or Deadwood, the promise of a new frontier, a new beginning. Larry McMurtry is a beautiful writer, and even though this is one of the longest novels I've ever read, I still keep reading it every few years. It is a yarn that knits friendship and true love and high adventure and history. And, it's also a hell of a story. And it's even a pretty good miniseries. So this is my old dog-eared copy. I'll be taking it off the shelf and rereading it soon. I hope you'll join me.
Well, that was really great. I don't usually read Westerns, but especially when we're stuck in the house, I can just sort of imagine going out there and seeing the plains and seeing these landscapes. Fortunately, in order to get the book, as I said, you don't have to leave the house at all. You can just go to the Chelmsford Library website. This is available on Overdrive, and also the television miniseries is available on Hoopla. You can download movies and TV there as well. All right, next up is Elizabeth Silva, who is one of the producers for CHS TV.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Silva, and I'm one of the producers at CHS TV. And I've been reading a lot during this pandemic, and one of the books that I've been reading is called It's Kind of a Funny Story by Ned Vizzini. I hope I said that right. But it's a really, really good book, and it's about this kid named Craig, who has a mental illness, and he's severely depressed, and he tries to commit suicide. And he goes into a psychiatric ward at the hospital, and he meets a lot of different people with other mental problems. And it's kind of about how it's broken up into parts, which is really nice, and it's kind of the stages in his journey. So it starts of like why he became that way when he was in the hospital and after. And so it's really nice how it's split up that way. And I really love how he writes, because he writes it very simply. And usually I like very descriptive, in-depth kind of writing. But the way he writes it is like he writes a simple sentence, like he notices something or he mentions something. And it has such a deep meaning to it. Like, it really does. And that's kind of a talent, because I feel like a writer can, be just so descriptive in a whole paragraph about one thing, which is great. But he writes it in one sentence, and it really makes you think. And he's also kind of has a dry kind of humor. I mean, that can be seen from the title. It's kind of a funny story when it's really not a funny story. And I just really enjoyed the book because of that. And I think what made me want to read the book is it's all about the brain and about your mental state. And I'm really into psychology, and I want to go into psychology in the field somehow. And I just want to help people. And I think I can relate to him because he is a teenager himself, this Craig. And he, gets involved with the wrong people and all about that. And he's a really smart person. But when he went into so he goes into this school that's for really smart people, he really struggles. And that kind of is you can relate to that as a teenager, because school is hard and all the stresses in society is hard. But dealing with it the right way is what you need to do. And also being aware of that around in society. So I want to be aware of that. Like, if I see something or someone that might be depressed or might have a problem, I want to see that and recognize it. And I think all people should do that. And by reading books like this, you don't have to read a scientific book. You don't have to read articles and all of that and really in-depth science. You can just read books like this and novels about this sort of thing, and that's really important in life, I think. And it's interesting because the author, Ned Vizzini, he himself went to a psychiatric hospital. He himself was severely depressed and tried to commit suicide. So this is a kind of memoir, even though the main character is not Ned, it's Craig. It's kind of written that way and through his own experiences, and he actually committed suicide, the author, years after he wrote the book. So he really was struggling with this. And so that's a real life person that struggles with depression and suicidal thoughts. And that's in the real world, and I think people should be aware of that. And yes, maybe it's not the happiest book to read during this pandemic, but he is a funny author, and it's interesting to read, and I think it's a very important book to read. So yeah, I really recommend It's Kind of a Funny Story.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That book sounds really amazing and like an important thing to read right now when a lot of us are feeling super isolated and cut off from the people around us who usually care about us. And as I said for these other books, this one is available on Hoopla, both as an audiobook and an ebook. You can also get the official soundtrack from the 2010 movie that was based on the book. All right, next up we have Jess Fitzhanso, who's probably a familiar face to a lot of you who've gotten book recommendations through us before, either here at Chelmsford Telemedia or at the library. She runs our Friday Fiction program. She takes care of a lot of our displays and reading recommendations. She's what we call a reader's advisory librarian. She makes sure you find that new author that you didn't even know that you wanted to read their books until you hear her talk about them.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica and I'm a librarian at the Chelmsford Library. Right before we had to close the building, I managed to snag a few books that have been on my TBR shelf for a while, and one of them is Eight Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. It's the latest by Peter Swanson. I'm not typically a reader of this genre, but I do really like Peter Swanson's novels. He seems to really know what he's talking about, and he is just an excellent writer. This one is just been proven to be a really excellent distraction at this time too. You just get pulled into this fast-paced, taut psychological suspense story. It also is set locally, so that's kind of nice. There's some familiar locations that he talks about in the book. Our main narrator is Malcolm Kershaw. Malcolm Kershaw is a bookseller at a bookstore in Boston. It's a specialty used bookstore that specializes in suspense and mystery novels. Earlier in his career, Malcolm had produced an article which listed the 8 most perfect murders in literature. And those included the ABC murders, Double Indemnity, Strangers on a Train, The Drowner, The Red House Mystery, Malice Afterthought, Death Trap, and The Secret History. So even though I may be familiar with a few of those just because they're classics, it has given me some great suggestions for further reading once I'm finished with this one. So that's a bonus. Anyway, someone is now using Malcolm's list to commit murders across Massachusetts and New England. The FBI has caught on to the pattern, and they're now consulting with Malcolm to see if he can help them to figure out what the next murder is going to be, where it's going to be, who the murderer might be. Malcolm is conducting his own investigation to catch the murderer before the FBI does, because he thinks there's more of a connection than just the murderer using this list, and he wants to find out what that might be before the FBI does, so he can protect the secrets in his own past. So yeah, it's just been great. And if you can't pick this one up, I hope that you are finding something on your TBR shelf that is keeping you afloat at this time. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thanks, Jess. That book sounds like a fantastic distraction. I always love a mystery, especially one that has local roots, so we really know what's going on there. And as I said before, this book is available as a download from Hoopla. If you don't have the app already, it's really easy, just a couple of clicks to install it, and you use your email address and your library card. Speaking of things with local roots, next up we have Pete Padula, the director of Chelmsford Telemedia. He's here usually behind the scenes, cutting together videos and making things for you guys to watch at home. And he's going to be talking about a book that he recently picked up.
Hi, I'm Pete Padula. I'm the director of Chelmsford Telemedia, the public access TV station here in Chelmsford. So what am I reading during the pandemic? Well, I'm actually reading The Coldest Winter by David Halberstam. Now, this book is a history of the Korean War. And the reason I picked it was about a year ago, I realized that I knew nothing about the Korean War. And I went online and I Googled, what's the best history of the Vietnam War, and this came up. So I ordered it, and it came. It's about, 700 pages long. So I put it on the shelf, and I forgot about it for a while. Then the pandemic hit, and I thought, well, maybe now's the time to pull that book off the shelf. And then I thought again, well, I don't know if it's kind of a very uplifting story. Maybe now's not a good time to read it. Well, I was surprised because I picked up the book, and within a page, I was pretty much hooked. Let me also say, I'm not really a war buff, I do have some curiosity about history, and I obviously was curious to know more about this war. But I'm not really into the war and the history and the guns and which tank was better than the other tank. This isn't really about that. It's mostly about the political, socio-political history, although you do get a lot of the troop movements and that sort of thing too. In any case, it's really well written. It seems to be incredibly well researched. Within a page, I was hooked. And I've already read about 100 pages in the last 2 or 3 days, which is a lot for me. I'm not really a great or a fast reader. So That's what I'm doing to pass the time during the pandemic. I highly recommend it if you want maybe more information about the Korean War, if you want a window into the politics of the time. Oh, one thing that I've really been loving is reading about Douglas MacArthur, who I knew was this legendary war figure, but apparently he was a lot more bluster than talent. And so far, it's just an amazing story about him in particular. In any case, David Halberstam, The Coldest Winter, that's my recommendation.
Thanks, Pete. That was really great. Unfortunately, The Coldest Winter is actually one of the books that's not available online right now. However, David Halberstam, the author, is a really prolific writer. He's written a lot of history, from The Great Reckoning, which is about the collapse of the American auto industry, to War in the Time of Peace, which is a look at foreign policy during the Bill Clinton presidency. He's also really well known as a sports writer, and so he's written about some of the great moments in World Series baseball history, and he's written about seasons of basketball. So check those out, both as books and audiobooks, and you can find something that'll appeal to you, I'm sure. Pete's take also reminded me to remind you that even if you don't consider yourself a great reader, you don't have to be a librarian, you don't have to read another book every week. There can just be one thing that you really remember reading and love. Make a video, share it with us. We'll share it with everybody else, and everybody will get to enjoy these great reads together. Next up is another familiar face. Lisa Francine is another one of our Reader's Advisory librarians at the library. She is great with recommendations, and she really loves poetry, so she's going to talk about some things and do a reading of something that was really meaningful for her today.
Hello folks, my name is Lisa Francine. I'm one of the staff librarians at the Chelmsford Public Library, and I would like to share with you today some poetry by Mary Oliver. Mary is fabulous in her ability to share both the natural world and the everyday world around her, as well as thinking about what's going on for her in relationship to the world. She is a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, and I find that in times when I'm having a hard time focusing, I really appreciate being able to dip in and out of poetry. So I'm just going to share two of her poems today with you. The first one's entitled Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Where whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. Morning in a new land. In trees still dipping night, some nameless birds woke, shook out their arrowy wings and sang, slowly, like finches sifting through a dream. The pink sun fell like glass into the fields. 2 chestnuts and a dapple gray, their shoulders wet with light, their dark hair streaming, climbed the hill. The last mist fell away, and under the trees beyond time's brittle drift, I stood like Adam in his lonely garden, on that first morning, shaken out of sleep, rubbing his eyes, listening, parting the leaves, like tissue on some vast, incredible gift. I hope that you are well, that your families and friends are well, and that you are safe. Take care until the next edition of Off the Shelf.
That was really great, Lisa. Thank you so much. And Lisa, of course, is also reminding us that April is National Poetry Month. The library always celebrates. We have a poetry slam at the end of the month. We're going to have to do things a little bit differently this year, of course. We're going to be doing it online, live, but people will still be able to share their work, their original poetry, and everybody will get to enjoy that together. But we're also going to do a program where we ask you to share a favorite poem by somebody else, or write a short poem and just send it to us, again, through our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, and we'll share that with the rest of the community, and everybody will get to do this together in this time when we're all sort of stuck at home. Our final presentation today is by another one of our CHS TV producers, Sarah Evans.
Hi, I'm Sarah Evans, and I'm one of the producers of CHS TV. During this pandemic, I've been reading a lot, and one of my favorite books that I've picked up is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. I've read this book before and it's good, but I decided to pick it up again, and I've been noticing some things about it that have they've made me really captivated with this story. And basically, it starts off with a protagonist, a girl named April May, who's walking around in New York at 3 in the morning and discovers this robot statue that suddenly appears in the middle of Manhattan. And she takes a video and uploads it to YouTube, and she finds out that this statue is a really big deal, and she comes to realize, like, she's an overnight celebrity because this statue impacts the entire world in a sequence of crazy events that follow. And it's pretty interesting because it shows the world coming together to figure out this kind of mystery and this event that impacts all of them equally. And everyone is working together, and it shows the ability of all of us to work together to defeat an enemy if it impacts everyone in the world equally, which is interesting. But in addition to that, society is also tearing itself apart because everyone keeps trying to push the blame of events that have been happening on other people because of a series of ill-founded beliefs and unjust prejudices. And it also shows the intricacies of relationships between people, like April and her friends, and other people in the novel that she's close with, and how outside influences can destroy relationships, and like power and fame. And this book has been making me think a lot about the world that we live in today and how people interact with each other and just the competitive and destructive tendencies people can get when they come into contact with power or fame. And it was written 2 years ago, but I've been kind of comparing it to events that have been happening today because it's interesting how the author was able to nail down the behavior of people during a global crisis such as this. And the sequel is coming out in July, and I can't wait to read it. Overall, it's kept me hooked, and I highly recommend it to anyone looking for a good book to read.
Wow, so as Sarah says, An Absolutely Remarkable Thing sounds like the perfect book to be reading during this time of crisis right now, really helping us to understand the mentality of people around us and how things could go wrong, but could also get a lot better if we all work together. Now, this again is available on Overdrive as a digital book and audiobook. You don't have to pick something that's available on Hoopla or Overdrive to do your own off-the-shelf production, but just go ahead and record your video, share it with us. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you all so much.